And we're now live, Chairman.
Thank you, everybody. Good evening and welcome to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee for Community Wellbeing. I think tonight is a meeting of quality rather than quantity due to a number of people who have gone sick tonight or today. So I'm very grateful for those who have managed to get here and welcome everybody else. If we can go straight to the minutes. So the minutes of the meeting held on the 25th of May, which seems a lifetime away, published on the council's website. Is everybody content with the accuracy of those meetings? Yep, okay, thank you very much. Apologies for absence and substitutes. Kim.
Apologies have been received from Councillor Val Henry and Councillor George Wilson as of this morning.
Georgina, you've changed. I had it down for Kim, but thank you for that. Declarations of interest.
None received.
Questions from members of the public.
None received.
And questions from members.
None received. Excellent.
Okay, so we'll go to agenda items. One could say that's a blessing in disguise. So we'll just wait for Kelvin and Katie to get their cards for their microphones. Okay, brilliant. Okay, so agenda item 6, which is the committee work programme, that's pages 7 to 16. Mark, would you be kind enough just to lead us through and then we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you. So there are a few smallish updates since this was published to section A. I've had confirmation that Waverley Training Services did hold a presentation for councillors as was suggested in May. Also, pertinently for later in the agenda, the executive accepted the recommendations from the interim SLA working group that this committee set up, and that feeds through into the item, I believe it's item 12 of the agenda. Going back to March 2021, the suggestion from this committee of there being an options appraisal for Farnham Museum, that's continuing to progress. I understand the deadline for advertisements for tenders has closed and that the applicants will have been interviewed by the end of the month. Moving on to section B, I was going to make a couple of suggestions, again linking into something later in on the agenda. If the new Health and Wellbeing Board goes ahead, my suggestion would be we have a standing item on the agenda to cover that, because as you can see, it would subsume quite a lot of the other items, and I think it's going to be a kind of significant enough piece of work that merits its own piece, its own item regularly. And there's also an item on leisure centres, contract due to come to executive in December. So I would suggest we try and have a look at that or whatever state that's in at our November meeting, in addition to discussing Cranny specifically. Finally, I know this committee has expressed some interest in emergency planning before, and there's an item on that coming to the value for money value for money's November meeting. So just so you can be aware of that.
Thank you, Mark. I've got a few issues I want to raise, and then please, members, indulge me to speak first on this one, and then raise your hands. Okay, so if we can just go back then to page 8, Waverley Training Services. Absolutely delighted everything they do. It's a professional organisation that, you know, Waverley should be rightly proud of. I'm really pleased that they've shown their work to the other members who might not be aware. So delighted to see that. Going down where it talks about the SLA, I'll wait to the agenda item before we speak too much on that. Going on to the next page, page 9, the first item about the neighbourhoods team engaging with towns and parishes. I think I'd like to know where the programme of engagement is. So are there dates where it's already programmed in? It might be just that it's there, I don't know, but maybe Kelvin or Katie later can just tell us where that is.
Sorry, just come over. Is that for the neighbourhood police team? You'd like their dates for when they're visiting town and parishes?
Yeah, it'd be really, really useful if it's visible to other members. They know which parishes they cover and when the neighbourhood teams go in. I think that'd be a really good engagement tool for the police and parish. And,
yeah, I will get that information off Sam Adcock, the inspector. That will, yeah.
Brilliant. So we'll just action that. Thank you for that. Next one down, I won't say anything at the moment because I think my vice chair might wish to say something on the Farnham Museum. So going down the page, then the last two, and that's about the draft suicide prevention plan. And then straight underneath that, it talks about endorsing the approach of creating a district level suicide prevention plan in conjunction with the county and NHS. It was brought to the March meeting, as the papers say. I'm just interested how it's been progressed since we've given our recommendations, etc. So it might be that I've just missed that, but I haven't personally seen what's come out of it. How has it been progressed? Are there timescales? Mark, if you've got any updates, that would be good.
Yes, there's quite a bit going on behind the scenes in terms of basically ascertaining, because a lot of the plan is about training for our staff, kind of ascertaining what the current position is and therefore what kind of targets we could sensibly set on that. I've also got a meeting in the diary with Nanu Chambers-Stanley, who was the suicide prevention lead at the county's public health team, to talk about further ways we can progress this. And I believe, Katie, your team's also started looking at this as well a bit. Or yeah.
Okay, can I just ask then, Mark, if that can be updated, because looking at it, it looks like we've done recommendations and what's happened. So I appreciate what you say and you're looking at targets and everything else. I would like, when it comes for the next meeting, we have some dates and we have some clear actions on what's happening, just because otherwise it will just fall between the cracks if we're not careful. And this is one of our priorities. It's something that we believed in passionately to get through. I just don't want it to fall down. So at the next meeting, if you can bring us a more substantive, or somebody an update, that would be good. But before I move on, Councillor Foraszewski, do you want to add anything?
Thank you, Chairman. If I may, obviously I'm utterly delighted to see this making progress, and I think it's okay having a strategy and having a plan, but then I think you need to start making real serious moves to implement it and make it work. And I think that means looking at local people, local councillors, forming subgroups, creating ideas of what we can do outside of the chamber to make sure that this just isn't a document that goes into the archives as being something that was nice doing someone's mayoral year, that it actually has got the substance. And I think it's also going to be very difficult going forward because lots of people will need lots of support because it's not a subject that's easy to talk about. So I think the more information we have on this and the more involvement we have and the more updates we have, and Nana was an exceptional individual who can help guide us, and it would be good in the future if maybe she would come to this committee to actually brief us and keep us all informed as to what's going on, because I think going forward what we do need is a subgroup to actually take some ideas that a few of us have got, because I can't believe I've absolutely been inundated by people in the community wanting to get involved in projects that could actually help. But I need that to be part of the plan within Waverley, not in isolation. So that's all I'd like to add. But obviously just to say that I'm delighted it's gone through the system, the whole proper system, and come out the other side. But having a plan is one thing, implementing it is more important. So thank you for all your work, Mark. Thank you, Chairman.
The policy, Louise Norrie wants to speak, please.
Go ahead, Louise.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to add to Mark's comments that we are preparing a new web page on our site to predominantly signpost people to organisations in our communities who are there to support people in whether they're in crisis or whether they're just just looking for sort of somebody to talk to or a group to join. So that's in the offing, and the training. It aligns with work that we're already doing in terms of training staff, in terms of supporting them with mental health, both internally as a staff team, but also in the community as well. A lot of the housing team have already been trained in this sort of first aid suicide prevention, and that will be being rolled out to other members of staff around it. And that's one of the things that we're meeting Nanu about on next week. So there has been quite a lot of progress, and obviously, yes, we'll bring this back to the committee and update you as well, and to show you what's been done.
Thank you, Louise. And I need to give my thanks not only to Councillor Folashewski, who's been an absolute champion on our behalf, but also to Louise and other staff who have really supported this committee in progressing this, Mark and others. So I'm very, very grateful. So Mark, can I ask, so obviously we're going to have a much more substantive update at the next meeting. It would be really useful, obviously, if Mary is involved prior to that meeting. So where it's going and the routes it's taken, you're fully on board, Mary, because you are our lead on this. So let's say substantive item for the next meeting, but a bit of an in-between meeting with Mary and suitable people, so we're all together on where we're going on this. So thank you for that. Okay. Councillor Else.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to ask, nothing substantial about this, but I can't read it very well. I don't know where A starts, where B starts, and where C starts, really. I mean, I have to, it's not, to me, it doesn't help me much. I wonder if it could be made a little clearer as to what we were actually working on, what we actually is in the pot, what's not. Because I find it really quite tricky. Is it just me? Because I mean, now we all understand things in a different way, but I don't understand this.
It probably been split A, B, and C. It's not clear what A means, what B means, and what C means.
Well, it only says A, and
yeah.
I don't know where B starts, and I don't know where C starts.
Probably because my copy is in colour.
Ah.
So when it's in colour, so on the top of page 8,
I haven't got that.
on top of page 8, it says Section A, Scrutiny Tracker, and then page 14, and then page 16. I think it helps if it's in colour, otherwise it's just a blur of a black ink.
Okay, thank you.
But yes, but I also sometimes think there's no clear or no clarity on what A, B and C means.
I hadn't turned enough pages on that. I thought I'd lost, but still, even so, it's not terribly clear to me as to where we're up to, because all the dates don't make any sense. And I know we've had COVID and we've had to we haven't been able to get on with a lot of things, but yeah, I just don't find it terribly easy. That's all.
No.
Probably just me.
I don't disagree. Mark?
Yeah, I think the point about that it's got to work in black and white as well as colour, because a lot of people are going to look at it in black and white. I think that's a point well made. The other thing to say is, because the anticipation is in the near future, the kind of committee structure will change. That's a good point to revisit the whole of these kind of documents and how they work, because we'll need to do a fresh one. And the other consequence of that is a lot of the kind of residual items in section A, which are things that the committee looked at quite a long time ago, will just naturally drop off at that point. So it'll be a shorter document, which should make it a bit easier to follow as well.
Thank you. Just going on to page 11, the Safer Waverley Partnership. With the updated responses, so the first sentence, so the communication protocol was being developed. I'm not sure I've ever seen that. Next one, the issue is being reviewed. Well, normally that means nothing's happened on it, and it's I'll finish first, Katie, before you jump in. And the bottom one, the JET, I think it's at least 2 meetings that we've asked for an update on the JET. I'm quite happy to ask for Richard Holmwood to actually attend, because it's the 3rd meeting, and I don't think really that's acceptable, especially when members of the public are viewing this. We've asked for an update, it hasn't come, so if we can formally ask Richard Holmwood to present on the JET at that meeting. Okay, do you want to come back on that?
No, I was just going to say that the categorization, did you see the list that came from Sergeant Claire Sutherland of how the categorizations of how they categorize rural crime in the police? Because she actually prepared a list that, okay, because I can resend that out. That was actually done a few months ago. The other thing the neighbourhood police team did only last month was a whole week on rural crime, and they went out to local areas where there's some hotspots. So they did quite a lot around rural crime only last month, which I think was really positive. But I can send through the categorizations. I'm maybe a bit out, but is that what you need? Because that's easy to supply.
Yeah, I mean, the question at the time was from Councillor Rubini about the rural crime and understanding it, and there seemed to be a lack of understanding. That'd be really useful to send it, but could you also send something to Mark so that update section can be done? I only have one other issue. I'm on a roll here. The top of page 12. This is the commitment to the mental health strategy, including suicide prevention. The update was suggesting will be fed into the development of the corporate strategy. And my question was, and was it actually included or not? So it was fed in, but actually, did they actually make it sort of actually explicit in it? And I admit I haven't reviewed the corporate strategy to make sure there was a particular issue. Mark, if you can just update me.
Yes, so this is before my time, but I did actually have to read the corporate strategy in the context of helping to draw up the reports around suicide prevention. And it does mention mental health quite a lot, so it might have got in that way. It's a kind of theme.
Fine, Mark. Can you just having as I've raised that point now, sort of the mental health and suicide prevention, would you be kind enough just to review that now it's been raised with that question, just to make sure it is included in a way so it's absolutely clear that it is a priority for this organisation? Thank you. Right, that's my ramblings. I'll open it up now to anybody else who's got any views they wish to raise. Councillor Wojciechowski.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just very quickly to come back on that last point, following some emails after the last full council, I did have reassurances from the leader of the council that the corporate strategy as a document that's evolving all of the time, the suicide prevention strategy would go in there. So I'm comfortable that that will happen. I just think it's a question of making sure we do keep all our current documents and strategies up to date, because they are live documents that just evolve as we work towards implementing them and putting more content in them. So as I say, it'd be nice to know that it's in there, but I've had assurances from the leader that it will be.
Thank you for that. Can I just say assurances are great, but action's better. And I know myself, sometimes you can give an assurance and then you get sidetracked into something else. So I would just like, and Mark, just to make sure, you know, even have a discussion with you, are we, you know, because an assurance, and I'm sure it's a genuine assurance, but I know I can get sidetracked and then you get pulled in a different direction and you don't actually do quite what you say. So we'll just double check to make sure. Anything else?
Yeah, Chairman, the leader wants to say something.
Sorry, Kevin, I'm happy to assure you that it will be the next iteration of the strategy. We're just waiting for a number of items that we're doing at once. So not to be flippant, but it's on my board in the office, which means it will get done.
I was just about to decide whether to let you speak or not, but I think you jumped in and said it before I chose.
My apologies, Chair. I can't see the video. So,
I'm only pulling your leg, leader. No, and I'm sure you understand. I know when people are busy with the best of intentions, and I put my own hand up on that. I say I'm going to do something, and I forget. So if it's on your board, that to me, you know, I have confidence in that. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Chair. But thankfully, Waverley doesn't revolve entirely around me remembering. There are plenty of officers that are doing this all the time. So it's all in hand.
Okay, thank you for that. Vice Chair, I think you've got some comments.
I've just got one small thing, and I might be wrong, but on the top of page 8, it says May 2020 committee work program work, report back on Aging Well strategy plan. And then it says it should be on the agenda for the September meeting. I'm just wondering if I've got the right agenda, because I couldn't see an Aging Well strategy plan on tonight's agenda.
Mark, please.
Katie may want to speak to this, but I believe it's been absorbed into the health and wellbeing item. It's part of that potential expansion of that kind of work stream.
Okay, thank you, everybody. As no more hands up unless I've missed any. Corporate finance report. It's pages 17 to page 70. It is a large report. What would be really, really useful is when I looked on page 23, there's no page numbers again. And I do feel like a bit of a broken record, I think, in probably the last 5 or 6 meetings, saying it would make it far easier if there's a page number on a 50-page document so we can turn to. So, Mark, if you can feed that back, it's just really, I know it is for convenience, but it means that we can focus on what's important to this committee. Kelvin, I believe that you may be also substituting for Andrew Smith, as it says in my paperwork. He's probably forgotten to tell you, but so if you can lead off, and if you can try and tell us which page you're on, that would be very useful.
I think the performance of might want to say something.
Okay, please go ahead. Sorry, my apologies. I can't really see the 2 screens. Thank you.
That's not a problem, Chair. And the point about the page numbers is definitely taken on board. We have revisited the format of the report, and the links were installed in there for quick navigation around the document on the soft versions. But of course, when we are dealing with the paperwork, hard copies, that has not been reflected. So we'll amend that going forward. The only thing I wanted to say before you pass on to Kelvin was that we had another kind of busy quarter post-pandemic recovery that will be reflected in our dashboards. The committee is asked to look at 2 specific areas, as you've mentioned. So we have commercial services and community aspect within housing delivery and communities dashboard as well. And one thing that the committee might be interested in, just to let you know, that the services are undertaking again the annual service plans review alongside the budget preparatory exercise, and the outcome of those proposals will be brought back to some form of O&S committees in January once it goes through the standards, so we know what structure happens there. So yeah, that's all from me, and I will pass on to Kelvin now to brief you on your on the areas of on the kind of performance within his area.
Thank you, Chair. I'll cover off commercial services and the areas relevant to this committee. That's page 42 on my papers, if you can get those. So in a brief summary, and Nora's alluded to it, it's been another extremely busy quarter for the teams. The leisure centres have now fully opened, but during this quarter we were still operating under some restrictions. It's really pleasing to note, and you'll see it from the performance, that visitor numbers to the centres have increased considerably over this quarter. So we're over 200,000 for this quarter. So that's a really big step forward, and we're seeing that continuing into this quarter. Wavy Trainer Services, as we know, operated throughout COVID. They've continued to perform well, as you can see from the KPIs. We're well ahead of the indicators. What also happened during this quarter, we were chosen as a pilot for Ofsted just to trial their new inspection framework, which it shows how highly thought of that we are within Ofsted. And it was a tremendous learning curve for the team, because it's a whole new inspection framework which Ofsted use for their own. There's no paper on that, they use it for their own learning, but it also helps us for when our future sort of inspection comes around. So it was a really pleasing to be asked. And I think, again, the team really performed well. Careline, it's been one of the one area where we've struggled to really grow since COVID. So we're still dealing with an extremely vulnerable group of people, and growing the service has proven difficult. We've got additional support in from our comp funding for the next quarter, and we're hoping to develop higher client numbers going forward. But what is pleasing to see from the performance is all critical faults were dealt with in 100%. We've dealt really effectively with any emergency calls during this quarter. So although our numbers have remained static around 1,600 to 1,650, there's going to be a real push to reach out to those vulnerable adults over the coming quarters to grow that service. Cultural services, it's a bit of a quieter one during this quarter, but we've now seen things beginning to open up, and hopefully I'll be able to talk more about culture as we go forward. A lot of my report will be going to Environment O&S on parks and countryside, but just to note, Frensham saw some extremely high visitor numbers during this quarter in June, and I was really pleased with how the team dealt with that. And the grass cutting we will cover off at Environment O&S. Looking at the KPIs relevant to this committee, I think they're all in line, and as I said, it's pleasing to see the leisure centre numbers coming up, and that is really reflected within the financial performance. So we are predicting quite an adverse financial hit this year through leisure centre usage, but that has grown really quickly. So we're looking at a break-even position at the moment, and we look hopeful for a surplus position going forward for the rest of this year. That's everything on commercial services relevant to this committee. I'm happy to answer questions, Chair, now, and Katie is going to cover off the community element for Andrew in his absence.
Councillor Else.
Thank you. I would just like to comment on your the grass cutting situation. I think it's very confusing at the moment, not at all sure where we are with it. I like your choice of word, resume planned grass cutting at more sites following feedback from residents. I'd just like to ask you, would that feedback have anything at all or any connection with the number of complaints that came in June? Because you got 56 complaints in June. And I wondered what generally they were about. Is there a correlation between that number of complaints and the lack of grass cutting? Thank you.
Just to say that in our area, this has been absolute bedlam. I mean, every councillor I speak to in both Farnham Town Council has had complaints about the grass, and it's all over social media. So I think the one thing I would like to pick up is it says here, there's a revised programme with a summary table. What would be really good is that summary table be circulated, I think, to as many people as possible so that we could tick it back, because I've still got places that haven't been mowed. I've got a football field in my ward that hasn't been mowed all summer, and it was on the Sandy Hill estate of all places, and those children haven't had a football field to play on. So thank you.
I'll just add maybe a comment and maybe hand it back to Kelvin. Yeah, I mean, I think most councillors have had complaints. I have. I know Waverley did send out the grass cutters to make it good, and then said, well, the equipment wasn't suitable because the grass is now too high, so it's been left. And you know, often things are done in good faith and for the right reasons, but it's the consequences afterwards. And you know, it has caused a lot of complaints. I know there have been some requests for it to be rectified, and they're sort of haven't been dealt with particularly quick from my own parish. So it is a shame, because I think it was done in good intent, but it's probably caused more complaints and probably compliments. But so if I'll leave you to answer that, I only had one point, was obviously, which was page 44. That was the percentage of completed building control applications. We're down, you know, we're 67% with a target of 80. I know they'll be fully aware of the issues, so I'm probably pushing against an open door, but we have gone from 86% to 77% down to 67%, and I know a number of people are quite unhappy locally about that. So I just flag it up. I'm not expecting an answer, Kelvin, but I think it's only right that we flag it, you know, it's flagged up as an issue.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, of course, the building control performance is concerning to myself as head of service as well. I think I would just like to assure members that all statutory requirements are hit. This is an internal challenge that my team, I think, need to sort of improve upon, but please be assured that all plan checks are made well within the statutory time frames. So there's no sort of risk to members of the public. This is a little bit of and I don't like to blame IT, but there is a few issues with the new system that's been, and I feel that that's created more of a human error element, but I'll look to rectify that. Hopefully at the next quarter we will see the improvement, and I'll bring forward a little bit more detail in my report and update. With regard to the grass cutting, I think, like I say, this will go forward at Environment O&S on the 29th of September. So I'm absolutely no doubt that I will receive the same comments that I've received this evening. I think what we would say as a service, there's been lots of lessons learned, and there has been lots of complaints. We're not here to hide from that. We've tried to be as transparent as possible. There have been some compliments as well about the idea. And then what's unfortunately happened is we hit a perfect storm of wet rain, summer, and the catching up from the no-mow period has proven to be extremely challenging for our contractors, and I can only apologise to members and members of the public. But what will happen from here is we'll be bringing forward a very clear project plan for how, taking on board all the comments in the areas that we now realise should never be left uncut, where there's been safety issues, and there'll be a much more detailed project coming forward over the next 4 months during the winter period for the new year that I can certainly look to bring forward to members so that they're assured going into the next cutting season.
Thank you, Kelvin. Councillor Else.
Thank you for letting me come back, Chairman. I just would like to ask one more question that has been asked of me by many, many residents. What have Continental been doing while they haven't, this is not I'm not being funny here, but what have they been doing while they haven't been cutting the grass? Because everywhere is in such a state. What other tasks did you set them, or how did that work?
Thank you, Chair. I can, like I say, I haven't prepared for this O&S, but just to give an example, there's been many changes on how we approach weed control, and that necessitates manual removal. So we've moved away from using glyphosate, and that's probably the wrong word, but basically a weed killer that's pretty dangerous for biodiversity and insects, and that creates quite a manual requirement, and it can't be underestimated, directing them to actually pull weeds out as opposed to a generic spray. And in addition, we've focused them on key areas of biodiversity. But I will bring back, and I'm happy to share that detail because it's a question that has been asked. So Matt and I will be presenting fully to Environment O&S and giving much more detailed feedback. So apologies.
The leader wants to say something again.
Oh, that's a surprise. But before I get to the leader, Councillor Wojcicki, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of things. I think as a human race, we've got an awful lot to answer for. We really have. And when we look at some of these figures here from the 13th and the 14th, to see that 4 members of staff were verbally abused and 1 member of staff injured, it's utterly appalling. Utterly appalling. Should not happen at all. Now, I am going to say that I'm a big supporter of No Mow May. I took part in it in myself with a piece of land that I own, and I think the weather, as you say, it was the perfect storm for grow, sunshine, rain, sunshine. So the odds were against you all of the time. And I know from my own personal experience, the hard work now required to get back on top. But what I would say, the benefits have been colossal. And I know a lot of people I've spoken to have really welcomed this. I think you're right, there's lessons to be learned. And I think those lessons to be learned are that there has to be safe areas. Sight lines have to be made sure that they're always clear. But I think the benefits to the environment are enormous. The danger that we are doing is colossal. I think it's a small price to pay for the number of complaints that we've actually received. And as I say, you're talking to someone who's been managing a piece of land and taking part in this as my own personal initiative. So I appreciate all the things that you've come up against, but I do think it was the right thing to do. Lessons are learned. Let's get it. Who said it was never going to work first time round? But there are things we can take away and implement it, because I think we have a duty to generations in the future that we are looking after the environment. And when you look at some of the figures that you've put there, man's got a lot to answer for. So I think, we need to book up our ideas, take a bit of responsibility, not complain as much, and get out there and do something for the environment. So I think you've done a great job. I don't think there's any apology required. I think you take away the lessons learned and implement them for the future. Thank you, Chairman, for letting me come back.
Thank you very much for that. And I think we've, as a committee, have given quite a measured response on that. And like you say, many people will be in favour and many people won't. I think, unfortunately, it's probably a couple of areas. I've got one area that's about 4 foot tall now, and it looks awful. And that's just, it was left not, to be cut, and it's never been cut now, and it's 4 foot high and you can't get anywhere in there. And those are the lessons to be learned. And as I say, I've always felt this committee is a very balanced. We have to try new things. Some work, some don't. Those who don't, maybe we can be flexible and try and make them work. And hopefully not just the views from this committee, but across members from all parties and all geographical areas will give the same sort of view. So it's not a criticism. It's okay. We now need to move on. We now need to get things right. So I know the leader will probably be twitching that he can't get in yet, so I've made him wait. So, Leader, it'll be my absolute pleasure to let you come back on this one.
Thank you, Chair. The one thing I just wanted to quickly say was that one of the first people to ask, well, what are Continental doing instead, was probably me. And there are plenty of things that we could have them do and did have them do. And as a result, Kelvin, there is an email that you sent me, and I think it might have been all councillors, but it might not have been, where you actually answered that question in full. And I'm sure we can dig that out and send that round to all councillors so that they're aware. And certainly this is something I explained to residents on a number of occasions, what we'd redeployed them to do. You're right in that that probably generated about as many compliments as it did complaints. And obviously we need to look at some of this going forward. And I think the last thing I'll say just more generally about the agenda, officers have been asked to prepare themselves for things on the agenda and not to try and duplicate across O&Ss. So if you get officers who are unprepared for a particular item, that will be why, just so that you're aware, Chair.
Absolutely, and I'm always aware that maybe Kelvin wouldn't have the answers, but he's normally good at bluffing them anyway. So any other points before I move on?
Yeah.
Vice Chair, please.
Just one really strong recommendation. If there is going to be a list or a table, or can we have it in its, even when it's roughest form? Because what we don't want is the final list and then everyone to spend like 2 months saying that's wrong. Let's get everyone to jump on it in its rough form so that we can just come to it and it's right at the end. I think that'd be easier. And can I just have one thing? What is the plan check performance? Is that the same as the 67% on the next page? Okay, lovely. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Kelvin. Anything you want to wrap up with?
Just to assure Councillor Dixon that, yeah, I think engagement with members that have brought forward sort of complaints and comments from their residents, there will be part of that journey. So yes, you will have that list of cutting and mowing regimes will come through for consultation before being decided.
Okay. Anything else, Kelvin, before handing over to Katie for Andrew Smith's part?
Thank you. And I have to say I'm not as prepared because I wasn't expecting to be Andrew Smith this evening. Obviously, I can talk about on the communities more confidently. And I think the other, I'm not sure if there are other areas on this that are relevant to this particular committee. So if you did have any questions, I could take them back to Andrew. He's back next week and he can answer them. In relation to the communities work, obviously, whilst we haven't got quite the extensive work of the community response with the pandemic. Oh, sorry, my fault. 58. Page 58 for the communities, 59, or there's another page number, which is 38, 39. Is that, I've got to, is it 58? It's the right one, yeah, 58, 59. Yeah, sorry. Yes, so with the communities work, although the work around the pandemic, particularly response side is ease, we're still doing a lot of work with our local voluntary organisations around delivering activity and support, particularly in this sort of, I would say, sort of bit of a crossover time where we're really understanding the impact of the pandemic to what really needs to be shaped with our partners and services going forward. We have been working closely with our CCGs, particularly Surrey Heartlands, around the digital connects type of work to help tackle loneliness and isolation. But I think we've yet to really see the impact. We've also working closely with Tamsin McLeod from Kelvin's team, the leisure manager, around mental health, and we're working very across the board on a number of activities. So that actually is really very high on our agenda, particularly the impacts of COVID on our 16 to 25-year-olds. We had a meeting today and we're quite surprised at the targets, particularly around it was in relation to the Farnham area, but actually there was a quarter of their statistics was for 16 to 25-year-olds who've been significantly impacted and had referrals re their mental health. So there's a lot of work going forward. One of the key areas that obviously we've been focusing on in the last few months is the development of the new funding process, which is due to be discussed later in this meeting, but also communicating with those organisations that are funded through a service level agreement. So we're doing a lot of work with those organisations as well to prepare them for change. In relation to community safety, we have seen over the period of COVID a sharp increase in community tension, particularly antisocial behaviour and neighbourhood disputes. And we had 3 very complex community triggers in the last quarter. The recommendations and actions where we hold our panel meetings, which is our partners coming together, reviewing all our actions, they are now monitored through the Safer Waverley Partnership Community Harm and Risk Management meeting on a 6-weekly basis. But as an officer point of view, for the officer involved, they take up a significant amount of workload at the moment because there is that contact with the victim who has put in the community trigger and then pulling everything together. So that has been a key piece of work. We have also, again, later on in the meeting, talked about the Safer Waverley Partnership Executive aligning itself more with our health and wellbeing leads, particularly as we see such an overlap, but Kelvin is going to lead on that area. Also, we had the final report of our internal safeguarding audit, which looks at all our processes around the safeguarding the vulnerable adults and children's policy. Again, a number of actions that we're now working through to ensure that, you know, we've met the actions that have come from that report. The rest of it, obviously, I'm not sure that this sits with this committee, but you do tell me if I'm wrong. And I say any questions on that, I can take that back to Andrew.
Fine, thank you very much for the update. Questions from members? Okay, Councillor Dixon.
Sorry, that was very interesting. Actually, I've got a question on the thing altogether. I must have got my pages wrong. I was looking at page 47, and perhaps you can take this back. Is that it says in paragraph 5, there's 2 licensing policy reviews: the gambling policy review and the sex establishment review. I haven't heard anything about that, and so I don't think it's been in my emails. So is this an online consultation, and have we been sent details of this? Should we be referring our residents to it to give their reviews?
That doesn't actually sit within our service, so it's not something I'm aware of, but I can find out and you know, find out the details of those reviews, consultations.
That's probably Richard Homewood's team, right? I'm happy to take away an action to trace that up.
Thank you for that. We can get the update for next time. Thank you for that question. If there's no other questions, can I just thank Nora and the team? You have to go through this report and try and anticipate what we might ask. But as always, your questions and answers have been very good. So thank you for that. And so unless there's anything else, I'm going to move on to agenda item number 8, which is pages 71 to 78. Katie, I think, or Kelvin's going to start off with an introduction, and then Katie, and I've got a couple of comments, and I'll open it up. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. We've got some colleagues with us virtually, and Katie to answer any sort of more detailed questions that I may struggle with. So this is an update paper that we've we've brought forward to you tonight. It's talking about aligning the Safer Waverley Partnership to incorporate health and well-being. So the view is that this creates a sort of clearer governance structure for the health and well-being. Since we sort of moved away from having a health and well-being board, there has been sort of a lack of that governance, and we feel this gives the opportunity for that. What the paper also explains is very similar numbers of partners attended both sets of meetings. That's health and well-being and community safety. So there seems a natural sort of reasoning to align those two areas, as there's many areas that overlap and need both partners, all partners, to be present. In addition, just as a way of ending it, this replicates what's happened at Surrey County Council. So they have already merged the Safer Waverley Partnership and their Health and Wellbeing Board. So this mirrors that. So one again hopes there's a certain synergy with what's happened at county-wide that we can align ourselves with. So this is an update just to bring you up forward with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes. Just as Kelvin said, Surrey's Health and Wellbeing Board and Community Safety Board merged in March last year because of the synergy of the boards. They actually, this is the opposite. They've done it the opposite way around. They already have merged their community safety priorities into the health and wellbeing, whereas what we're looking at doing is actually expanding the function of the Safer Waverley Partnership, so that they would include health and wellbeing in their remit and within everything they do. Obviously, we've had to seek permission from the Safer Waverley Partnership Executive, who the current chair is actually the current chair is Clinical Commissioning Group, Helen Milton. So actually, we've already got health leading our community Safer Waverley Partnership, because obviously they're part of that statutory partnership. What I think certainly we found over the last, well, through COVID and the impact of COVID, that we've seen a significant impact of health inequalities, but also with the health inequalities, we've also seen the impact of community tensions. And Tamsin and I are often at the same meetings. Tamsin's the health lead, obviously I'm the community safety lead. So we had naturally started to work together a lot more closely, so that we were not duplicating areas of work, and actually, if there was sort of a benefit to us, but working more closely. This is work in progress. We've obviously the Safer Waverley Partnership have agreed to extending their function, but obviously now we've got to do the groundwork behind how a health and wellbeing board, strategic board, can be delivered and be effective. And that's where we're looking at the development of a coordination and delivery group, which will be much more the officer led, and Eve Budd will be leading that. It might be useful, if you don't mind, if Tamsin comes in and says something at this stage on the health point of view, and then maybe open up for questions.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think Kelvin and Katie have summarised it really well and covered all the main points. But I think from my perspective, and particularly a health perspective, it's really important to have some synergy across the borough and between teams. And I think we're working really effectively together and effectively on the emerging priorities that have come out of COVID that we're seeing across the borough. And it's a really, really positive way forward, just to give us more structure and more guidance and a more of a strategic direction to try and deal with some of those really complex issues that are emerging. As raised in the report, we've got the health and wellbeing strategy, which sort of culminates this year, and we want to review and refresh that. So it's really good timing to bring everything together and look at new priorities and look at the steer and the direction for the next 5 years. Thank you.
Anything else from anyone before I kick off, so to speak? Can I just say a few words and I'll come to Councillor Earls? being a former chair of the Safer Waverley and also the chair of the Safer the Health and Wellbeing Board, I do absolutely understand the direction that you're trying to take this. So this is not a complaint about what's trying to, what you're trying to mould, and you're trying to coordinate, you're trying to synchronise the workloads. I used to sit on both boards and see the same people. So it's not a criticism of where this is going. My criticism is, and I have spoken offline, was I found out about this at the pre-brief. Bearing in mind, we as a committee are the statutory body that overviews by law the partnership group, and to find out that there were changes being made or suggested and nobody from this committee had been spoken to or updated was a bit of an error in my view, and I've made my views clear to those who should have made that decision. So as much as I'm a little bit miffed about that, this is about doing what's right for Waverley and the residents. I think there are a number of issues that we need to look at, for example, making sure that that statutory responsibility is still fulfilled. How do we scrutinise? It's sort of right at the very end. It does come in under the recommendations. We had to get to the recommendations before really understanding what the role of this committee is. So putting my slight annoyance to one side, as a principle, I'm supportive of anything that makes us more coordinated, less wasting time, duplication of meetings, and better use of our facilities. I would just ask in the future that when issues do come in that affect overview and scrutiny, that we are spoken to first, because it's far easier to have our support from the start and give our ideas and everything else than to be dropped in a meeting a week before we come today. So I'll put that to one side and I'll open up the discussion for any other views. Councillor Wells, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wondered whether you had discounted the idea of including in this, while you're tidying up and bringing things together, the Ageing Well strategy. Thank you.
Absolutely. The Ageing Well strategy actions already sit in the Health and Wellbeing Action Plan. And when the Health and Wellbeing strategy was developed, it was developed 1 month, and then the Health and Wellbeing strategy was developed the following month and went to committee. So there's always been that kind of complete overlap. Absolutely, it will form part of that piece of work. And particularly bringing in the community safety, what we have seen in the impact through COVID is, scams on more vulnerable and older residents. And, it's a really good time to kind of bring that and link it together. But yeah, absolutely right. Thanks, Jenny. That's else.
And I think, Councillor Wells, we've still got that responsibility to scrutinise those strategies, and especially when the strategies may slightly change to meet priorities. I think our role to scrutinise will be even greater. So I see structural changes, but actually I don't see any change in our role. We will still scrutinise, and we will hold people to account if we don't think the strategies benefit the residents of Waverley, as you would expect. Councillor Forszewski.
Thank you, Chairman. I also agree with what you were saying about the need to join forces together and not reinvent the wheel or have duplications and have too many people doing too many things. It's already been duplicated all over the place. So I can see a real necessity for that. But the question that kept going through my mind in all of this was the scrutiny part, because it comes back to the point, and forgive me for asking, but I just really want to know, why weren't we told? Because it kind of devalues our role, because then it makes you think, are we here to scrutinise or not? And if we're not told, we can't be part of it. So was it an oversight? Was it what was? And that's not a criticism of anybody. It's just with something of immense value, and we're expected to scrutinise it now and in the future. Why weren't we told? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chair. I think we would accept perhaps there was an oversight on that communication. We think the understanding was that there was always going to be a scrutiny of the strategies of the project of health and wellbeing and of the community safety still coming to this committee. So we do accept that, and as the chair has mentioned, we have spoken about this. So I think it's just one of those. We do think that was an oversight, and we apologise for that. But that was not our intention to cut scrutiny out. In fact, it's an integral part of this strategy going forward. So that's, you know, it's very much a role for the scrutiny.
Okay, thank you for that, Kelvin. I said we've had a discussion over it. You know, robust discussion, but you know, sometimes things aren't done. I think it was an acceptance. We move on, but that does not devalue our role from this point onwards in the process. You know, if you look at the recommendations, number 2 was about identifying members to take part in a workshop with partners. Now, I don't know if, you know, we are quite small here tonight. If there's people here who'd really like to be part of that process, I can see Councillor Else. So there's one volunteer. Please use, you know, this committee. You know, we will add value. We might not always agree, but we will get a better product if we work together. Anything else you'd like to come back on, Councillor Wojcicki?
Yes, Chairman, and thank you for letting me come back. And as I say, I'm mindful that I don't want this to be seen as a criticism of everyone, because I know how hard you all work. But I think you've just made the point very clearly there. Tonight, as I've come into this committee, I've been sort of wondering what's going on. You've known, but we haven't, or I haven't. And I think in the interest of transparency, it's really important that, you know, and I appreciate your honesty and explanation now, because it's out there for people to see. Because if it's not, then our role is questionable. And I just think we, you know, as I say, I was sitting here tonight thinking, oh, we're going to be doing away with O&S, or is our function going to be changing or whatever. That comes from a member's perspective, without being part of the chairman's role or the officer's role as a chairman, trying to do the job. I just feel as though I've been disarmed on this one. That's all I've got to say. It's not, please, it's not a criticism. It's just me not quite understanding the role, and I'm quite straight talking. I needed to know why. Thank you.
I think to say it was a surprise to me a few days ago was an understatement. And, you know, I'm one of these people, you know, we are where we are. I was not happy. I think to say I was robust and annoyed is an understatement. Those conversations took place in private, as they should. So, you know, I was literally only a couple of days ago. And then what we've done is we've had a good conversation prior to this meeting, and those views were put forward again, and the apology was offered. We can't turn the clock back, so now what we've got to show is what a professional scrutiny function this committee can perform and add value to it. I don't see the point in going over old ground. Well, it's not even old ground. Last, you know, 48, 72 hours, whatever it is, you know, let's just move on. I think the point's been made. And I just asked that Councillor Elsa's, you know, her hand went shooting up to be involved, which is great. That you will be our eyes and ears for scrutiny, and will bring back issues if you feel prevent or inhibit scrutiny in the future. I'm hoping it might make scrutiny easier, that we have one group that has a responsibility for a number of issues that overlap. But the proof's in the pudding, and you will be our sheriff of that process. Okay, I think we probably, if people are happy to move on from that. So we go to agenda item 9, which is pages 79 to, in fact, there are 3 recommendations on there. So I think I need to just put those recommendations. I don't think there's any been prior to that. So the recommendations on page 73 on to 74, which was to support the alignment of shared priorities and establishment of a shared board and shared strategy. I think we support that. It's still being worked on, and if we think there's an issue, then we'll maybe flag it up. The second one was to identify members to take part in a workshop where partners and stakeholders to shape priorities and outcomes. councillor else will be that nominated person. And the third one, which is to continue to scrutinise the strategic function of the Safer Waverley Partnership. Well, that's our statutory responsibility, so we've got to do that, with the delivery of the shared health and wellbeing and community safety priorities. So it could actually increase, this whole thing could actually mean a little bit more work, but not so disjointed in one bit. So is everybody happy with those?
Agree.
Brilliant. So at least that they're signed off. Brilliant. Okay, so let's move on to the next section. We're doing quite well on time tonight. Agenda item 9, I've got this down page 79 to 96 to Mark to start with. So Mark, please.
Thank you, Chair. So those of you who've been around for a couple of years may have got used to seeing kind of a report like this coming out annually, but my understanding is that in the previous municipal year, given COVID, resources had to go elsewhere. So this report covers 2 municipal years. This is kind of a draft which has been approved by coordinating board. If anyone thinks that there's anything that's been missed or could be characterised better, I can happily write an amendment and put that back to coordinating board, because when it goes back there after this meeting cycle.
Thank you, Mark. I had no particular issues other than it says overview and scrutiny committee environment in the wrong date. That was the only thing. It had the wrong details on the front, but I think the content, which is the important thing. But colleagues, are there any points you want to raise? If not, okay, so thank you for that, and thank you for the people who prepared that. Mark, anything to sum up?
Just going to say to Councillor Else, if she finds that, if she remembers what that is, if you just drop me an email, I can probably work up. I can pass that along to coordinating board. Assume that's okay with you, Chair.
Really, thank you, Mark. I think the problem when you've got 127 pages, you put little markers down and you've got to find them. So, okay. So thank you to everybody who's prepared that report. I found it didn't waffle on. It was to the point. It just told you what you needed to know. So thank you very much for that. So item number 10, which was the COVID and community action, Richard Homewood to report. I don't know if someone's doing that on his behalf or. I haven't seen any documentation.
I'm not sure. Kim might know.
Yes, Chairman. Councillor Richard Homewood did tell me that it was going to be a verbal report, so that was the last I heard, was it would be a verbal report, but he's obviously not sent anybody to do it. So I do apologise.
Okay, well, that's a very quick verbal report. So, Mark, if you can speak to Mr. Homewood and ask him if he can do a quick summary report, as we can't have a verbal report, if that can be sent to all committee members and attached to the minutes as an additional addendum, we will have to do it that way. It's disappointing. I was expecting him to be, or at least have something to give us. Okay, so we'll move on then. So item number 11, which is the Cranny Leisure Centre update. I think Kelvin and Tamsin are going to do the updates. Thank you, Kelvin.
Thank you, Chair. It's an update from our last meeting, and there will be a much more full report coming forward in the next cycle. So just to update us, we are currently out to tender for a feasibility study. To update, you may remember before COVID, we had a feasibility study for a new leisure centre in Cranny. What we felt was prudent is just to confirm that the financial package that was set aside that proved it was viable was tested post-COVID, and that the facility mix was again reviewed post-COVID to make sure that any new leisure centre we bring forward reflects the new environment in which it will be built. So that's currently what's going on. We've also asked for the consultants to provide examples where leisure centres have been used to work with partners such as health, and other services are offered as part and parcel of a leisure and health and wellbeing provision. So the annoyance for this committee and for myself that I can't report more is we're expecting that report comes back to us at the end of this month, so early October. So we will be reviewing their findings during October. So then I'll be able to bring that report to November's committee, which will have a consultant's feedback on that feasibility study. So it's a little bit out of sync with our meeting schedule, but please be assured that that is ongoing and it's near to completion. So as soon as we've received that, we'll bring a report forward.
Okay, thank you, Kelvin. So again, if we can make sure this goes as a substantive written item for the November meeting, that would be very, very useful. Are there any questions? And so, you know, we're in that sort of influx at the moment, which I think we accept, but November is our sort of target to actually know, okay, what are we doing? What's our role in that? Because obviously our role is to scrutinise that and hopefully a helpful scrutiny. So, but are there any questions for tonight? Councillor Foraszewski.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for your report, Kelvin. It's always very interesting. Can I just say, as the Shadow Portfolio for Leisure, you were very helpful, most helpful indeed. We had a meeting a few weeks ago and you were very helpful. And I do appreciate there's an awful lot of work going on there at the moment. And with the previous study that was done, with the changes that, you know, it is an absolute minefield. I think it may be worth just touching on perhaps the Guildford side of things, because we know they've got their strategy as well, and we're trying to, and it might be useful to members of this committee to understand what we spoke about, so as they know what plans there are for Guildford as well. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. So to make members aware, Mark alluded to it earlier, there are some very big key decisions that need to be made prior to the retendering of the leisure management contract. So if we remind ourselves, the current leisure management contract runs out in June 23. Now that seems an age away, but as Councillor Foraszewski has just referred to, there's some quite complicated things within that. And it's probably about a year tender period to sort of warm the market up and be ready. And one of the key decisions are Cranny Leisure Centre. Are we committing to a new leisure centre? Does that stack up? That's one why it's important, Chair and councillors, that it comes back to your November one, because I need to be taking that forward to council later this year, or certainly very early 2022. The other element, as you are correct in saying, is the potential collaboration with Guildford Borough Council. So what Tams and I have been working on with our counterparts in Guildford is basically a tender for consultants to look at the potential opportunities that may exist with potentially tendering together for a contract, a larger contract with Guildford and Waverley together, or is there any value in us being separate? So there's a very detailed report that we will need again by the end of this year. So we've just appointed, Tams and I, with our colleague in Guildford, Jonathan Saul, have just completed the evaluation of the tender for that. So we have consultants that we will be appointing this week with a timeline, and Tams will probably shake her head on, around 5 weeks to create. It's a high level report looking at the opportunities of how we could collaborate with Guildford and whether there's a value to us either tendering together, separately, or in different lots. So it'll be another slightly complicated report, but one hopes that I can bring clarity to that again, probably in your November O&S, that again, so that we can take it forward into the new year.
Okay, thank you, Kelvin. I think one of the tricky things will be what's in exempt, excuse me, and what's in public on that one, because obviously they're, you know, be quite sensitive. So there may be a discussion before that to make sure that we don't stray from one into the other.
You are correct, Chair, and also it will be potential financial information on a neighbouring authority as well, because it will be a joint report. So we will work closely with our Democratic colleagues to make sure we get as much in public as we can, but there will be some exempt items, I've no doubt.
Absolutely fine. And of course, Councillor Forshevsky is our representative from this overview and scrutiny, as well as being a Cranny councillor. So, you know, it's great to hear that there's conversations taking place and work from that. Councillor Forshevsky.
Yeah, thank you. I'll be very brief, but I don't think we can underestimate the scale of, one, the contract and how much of a percentage leisure takes up of your department and the leisure centres, and the need for them, the real need for them now post-COVID, as health and well-being and recovery actually starts. But going on at once, there's several things going on there, as you say, the Cranny Leisure Centre, the contract coming to an end, the tendering process, Guildford. It's not just a simple question of produce a report that says this is what's going to happen. There's a lot more things all coinciding at once. So keep up the good work, and thank you for your time the other day. It was very valuable.
But I'll just add to that, you know, we have confidence in you, Kelvin, to try and unravel this. But I've also got confidence in Councillor Forshevsky sort of representing us and Cranley to make sure it's the right decision. And it's how do we scrutinise some very complex issues. I think we need to carefully look at what time we dedicate this, you know, so what our agenda is going to be for the meetings that this comes back. Although tonight's is going sort of swimmingly, time-wise, sometimes I struggle to keep people to 2 hours. So we might just need to, you know, 1 or 2 items at the very most, or when it gets to critical time, that we have just this as an item so we can give it the time it deserves. Because what I don't want to do is have a quick discussion, rush decisions or rush scrutiny, and that doesn't really benefit us. So that's really for you, Mark, we'll make that decision. Kelvin, anything? Sorry, anybody else, or back to Kelvin just to sum up?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And we would welcome that, because you are correct. We will need everyone's feedback into some big decisions, because as Councillor, you know, before COVID, we had over 2 million visits to our leisure centres a year. It's a phenomenally well used service, and yeah, it's extremely important to get your scrutiny in before we go into the new sort of financial year where we commit to a new leisure service. So thank you.
Okay, so we've got 2 items which we will swap around. Item 12 was exclusion of the press and public, because the item following that, which was the funding for voluntary, there were concerns whether it would stray into sort of exempt information. Following a discussion, and there's a couple of very small paragraphs that were taken out, if we keep to the document itself and don't stray from that, there is no need to go into exempt. If there is a question or query that we need to, we can go into exempt, Georgina, and that's not a problem. But I'm hoping that the report gives you the information you want without going into the sensitive information. So if everybody understands that decision, why it hasn't gone into exempt, and I think if we'd put the whole thing in exempt, people would be asking the questions, why is a complete process going into exempt when only a tiny bit of it possibly could stray? So I think it's the right decision to go down. So we're going to looking at pages 97 to pages 128. So if I can start off with Katie, I think if you start off talking through, and then I'll probably go to Councillor Wells to add her views from the scrutiny perspective. So Katie, would you like to start off?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, so the paper introduces you to the proposed new funding process for voluntary organisations. It is going to be proposed to call the Thriving Communities Commissioning Fund, and it will be open to, it'll be a new open fund that will be open to voluntary organisations, local voluntary organisations in Waverley to bid for under 4 priorities. We worked very closely with the service level agreement working group to understand their views, and we were pleased when we met with them that we had managed to sort of get most of that within this sort of document. We have 4 priorities for the Thriving Communities Commissioning Fund. Priority 1 is for improving people's health and well-being. Priority 2 is enabling access to information, advice and guidance. Priority 3 is reducing social isolation and loneliness. And priority 4, building stronger connected communities. We're coming to this committee obviously for your comments tonight, and so that we can then take them on to executive in a few weeks' time. I think it most probably is beneficial for Councillor Else to sort of speak now, because obviously she's been working closely with her for the feedback for the working group.
Whilst you're getting your papers together, I'll just say something, if I may, and hand over to you. I think it'd be amiss of me as chair not to thank the people from the working group, which was led by Councillor Els, Councillor Foraszewski, Councillor Michaela Gray and Councillor John Rubini. I think there's also been a tremendous amount of work from officers to try and unravel this. So I'd like to just put on record on the minutes my gratitude as the chair for the fantastic, committed and diligent work that they've done on this so far. Hopefully you've got your right page now, Councillor Els, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. I have got the right page, but I'm worried about what's with the 2 reports here. I don't know what's been left out in this one that I've made my notes on, and whether I'm going to go into.
Basically, I think provided there were 2 paragraphs in a previous version of the report that discussed specific conversations with specific organisations.
Oh.
So provided you don't reference those, you should be fine.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Well, if I do start, you'll just have to stop me. So one of my first questions was to be, well, first of all, I think I wanted to say, yes, that's the best way to do it. Our entire scoping report was changed because of COVID, and because the executive decided to have their own working group on this matter. So what we did, as I said at the last meeting, was we did a pre-scrutiny before executive working group came to their conclusions, and we then decided we would do a post report scrutiny. Now, we did that up to a point, but I didn't have all of this before me when we had our post scrutiny meeting a couple of weeks ago. So whilst we say that we recommend that this committee accept this report to go to the executive or to council or wherever it's going, there are a few questions I'd just like to sort out. First of all, I don't understand what the process should not separate population types means, because we decided to recommend, and it was accepted, I thought, that the whole thing was about action, not age, and it does say that in the body of this report. So what is this? The process should not separate population types. I don't quite understand that expression. Sorry, if I carry on. And then the other thing is, at the end, it says a budget should be ring-fenced for youth provision. well, because I thought it was going to be about action, not age, I don't understand why a budget should be ring-fenced for youth provision. And I don't know how much that might be. So that wasn't able to be scrutinised, that particular part of this. Shall I carry on? Yes, the other thing that worried me slightly was that whilst I was assured, and if I'm going into exempt, stop me, that the successful organisations would be funded for a 3-year period from April to March, April 22 to March 25. However, all funding agreements will include a clause that the overall budget needs to be agreed every year. Now, that's not good enough in my view, and I wouldn't have agreed to that as being a good idea had I known that was how it was going to be, because that's not giving people the confidence of having their funding for 3 years. So that was a worry, a concern, and I think that the budget needs to be ring-fenced for 3 years for them, or it's not, but it has to be more open and more transparent than I think this is. So that's a worry for me. The other thing that slightly worried me, 6.3, the legal side, successful organisations will be required to sign a funding agreement setting out the principles of the arrangement, the outputs, outcomes and monitoring information required. Should organisations not deliver to the funding requirements, the council reserve the right to withdraw any funding. Now, that is probably essential, but it's quite brutal. And I'd just like a sort of a caveat in that, because if you've got a really large organisation that's employing staff, etc., it's very blunt, and it's not the way that I think not-for-profit organisations and voluntary organisations ought to be treated. I'd like to see another sentence in there that says, we will work with them, etc. It's very bold and very blunt, and it's not a business we're dealing with, it's a not-for-profit organisation. So that was another thing that, sorry, that worried me slightly. And I think that was all, but I think that they were my main points, and they did worry me because I didn't know about any of these things when we met. These finer details weren't put before us.
Okay, before I hand over to Katie, if you look at the recommendation 1, it says about provide comments to executive. So I think those comments have been provided. I absolutely agree with the one on the 6.3, monitoring information required. You know, maybe we need to actually say, you know, like Councillor Elsa said, that, you know, we'll provide support to help them achieve it. You're absolutely right. You know, you just don't write, you haven't produced it, you lose all your money. Yeah, there has to be that support mechanism. So I do totally agree with that point. I have no sort of adverse comments other than what's been raised. So before I hand over to Katie, has anybody got any other points? Then you can sort of summarise in one go, Katie. Any other comments?
I've got one question, but it'll come later.
Okay, well, do you want to summarise on those?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Ells. I have to be honest, I thought this was the same document that went out when we spoke to you with the working group. So apologies if it changed and there's been some adaptations. I do apologise for that. I wasn't of the impression that it had been, but I can ask Jane when we get back. In relation to the first one that comes to mind is around the 3-year funding. Yes, it is 3-year funding. We have every year in the service level agreements, we had the same caveat that funding was always dependent on the budget setting process, and that was always that sort of a financial accounting thing. So we've always funded them for 3 years, but we always had within the service level agreement that the annual funding is always dependent upon the budget setting process in case the council had to prioritise completely the delivery of statutory services above this discretionary one. So that was a line that, you know, that we did explain to all the SLA organisations when they had their service level agreement. So it's something that we would explain again to those organisations. I can discuss it with obviously our finance team to see if we can remove that line, but it was always just the caveat, but you know, it was still the commitment to fund for 3 years. I think the first one, you mentioned around action, not age. I think that phrase, from my understanding from Jane, would mean the same thing, that we are looking at action, not age. What we are looking at is dependent on how, and this is a little bit work in process, is depending on how many applications we get and how broad they are, is to whether any of those we need to sort of think, well, actually we'll need to put those ones into young people, those into older people, those into mental health. We might have to just do some separation when it comes to funding them, but all of that is sort of work in progress as we understand how many organisations apply, because obviously this is an open round. We're not just funding the same 12 organisations that we funded in the past. Did I miss one out? I was trying to think of one. Yeah, that's what I just mentioned about that kind of, you know, we're not, I think that's sort of, we might need to look at how the pot, and actually we need sort of 200,000 for older people, you know, 200,000 for younger people. We just don't know until we get these applications in and how it looks, because organisations, we will get organisations who mainly work with older people, mainly work with younger people, and then it's trying to be ensuring that all good applications get a fair chance of the pot.
Thank you, Katie. They're very, you know, they're the finer points. I'm not saying, I think you've done a tremendous job here. So I don't want you to think that I don't appreciate the hard work that's gone into this. And on the whole, it's a really good piece of work. But I am still concerned, and I don't know, you know, that a budget should be ring fenced for youth provision. I mean, that is coming away entirely from what we discussed and what was presented as, what was presented as being the way forward. And so, you know, I hesitate to be able to support that myself, or to be able to recommend that to this committee. This committee may make its own mind up and decide that's okay. But as a representative who's been discussing it, I think I can't support that. Action, not age was such a brilliant way forward, I thought. But what we're doing is we're going off onto another area. Instead of mainly supporting older people, we're going towards the youth, which isn't a bad thing, but it ought to happen naturally and by selection rather than be prescribed in here in this document. But that's just the way that I feel about it. And I'd like to know, a budget should be ring fenced. Who's going to decide, how much is going to be ring fenced for youth provision, especially remembering that we aren't statutorily or mandatorily or whatever obliged to provide anything for anybody, actually. So I mean, why we pick on youth? I thought we were getting away from being too prescriptive, and that was the only thing that I thought when I read that, when I saw that. So that's one part that I am not happy about, but as I say, I'm only bringing back my thoughts to this committee. This committee might think this is absolutely fine. And I don't want to take away my admiration for the work that's gone into this from you. You do have it. I like the way you work and I like what you do. But I have to be honest.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you for that. I think your point is very well made about not being fenced in until we know exactly what we want to do. So going back to what the recommendation 1 is, and that is about providing our comments to the executive.
We've got one of the officers online wanting to talk.
Okay, I can't see who's that.
Christina.
Sorry?
Christina.
Okay.
I just, as the portfolio holder. Councillor Mirrlees.
Sorry, it says Christina.
Yeah, I know, I'm sorry, that's my formal name that I have. But I just wanted to make a comment about the youth provision, that given what has happened in the last year, and given that the SLAs that have been, were in place for the last 3 years, we felt very strongly that the youth are in enormous need, and we're not in any way ignoring the needs of the elderly population, but they have taken precedence in the last 3 years. And what we have now is a huge need, with the suicide prevention. It shows that has thrown that up as well. There's a lot of the people that are having mental issues are young people, and this has been exacerbated in this last year. And so I wouldn't say we're being prescriptive, but we are focusing. I think that's what we're trying to do. Focus on the young people as much as we can, as we have had on the older people, and we will still encompass their needs. But I really feel we need to help younger people a lot, which has not really been included in the past. And that's what I think Katie and her team have tried to do. Thank you. I just wanted to say that. And as for being blunt, yes, I'm quite happy about being blunt. I think people really have to know that we want these things to be as no messing around. I don't think it's being cruel or being rude. I think it's just making absolutely sure people know exactly what we're looking for. Thank you. Thanks for letting me speak. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I suppose it's that we said focus but not ring fenced. So it's how you define that. I think yes, we may want to have a focus, but I suppose saying that it's going to be ring fenced, we actually haven't even commenced the process. I think it's a little bit, bit too early to say that. I think the concerns have been raised. I think that maybe the comments, we can be focused, but there's concerns about it being ring fenced at this early stage. So I think that will then, hopefully that will cover that, because we're not supporting ring fenced until we know what are the issues, what are the applications and everything else. Now, when you look at point 1.3, and I'll do this before I forget, it's asked the committee to nominate a representative who will sit on the assessment panel. I know that's a process in the future. That's not in the recommendation, although it's in the paragraph before. So can I ask Mark to add a recommendation 2? And I'm going to be using Chair's prerogative here to say, so the recommendation is to nominate Councillor Jenny Else to be the representative on the representative panel on behalf of the Overview Scrutiny Panel for Wellbeing that will review applications. My apologies for not speaking to you before or asking you, but as you've done so much work on this, you are the natural person. If any of the other members wishes to, then you may get 2 members. Firstly, are people happy with that as an additional recommendation? And if anybody else, Councillor Wilson or Councillor Henry, one of the others who couldn't make it tonight, we can add them as a second representative. But if you've got a passion, which you have, well, let's have a willing volunteer rather than press ganged. So I think, so the point about the youth to me is that to be recorded is, so yes, we understand there's a reason to, an ambition to focus after COVID and all the various issues, but we're not totally supporting on a ring-fenced amount until we know exactly what's in the mix. Mark, if I come to you and then I'll open it up.
I was just going to ask if you wanted, because I think there's quite a specific point there about basically removing the sections of the report that refer to the ring fencing, but you wanted to make that not just as a comment, but as a specific resolution in and of itself. Okay, so it's a third resolution, I think, then.
Thank you, Councillor Dixon.
I don't know if I'm speaking at the right point in the meeting, if we're still talking about recommendations. So I'll say what I'm saying, then you can tell me to speak later if I need to. Okay, so just one thing. I read the report and it is absolutely exceptional. I agree with that, and compliments to the team that put it together. I was interested though in one thing that you've got on page 16 or page 120, which is about isolation and loneliness. And it says here that Farnham Castle, the ward in Farnham, which is Castle Street essentially, has got the highest rate of one-person households and possible areas for loneliness and isolation. I did wonder, because Farnham Castle is Castle Street, so I did wonder whether or not this number included the student accommodation at UCA, which might give you the high number of one-person households. And with my hand on my heart, George Hess isn't here, but I'm sure it doesn't strike me as being the place where you're going to have much rural loneliness and isolation. And just thought as an example, because that whole section is headed up loneliness and social isolation in Waverley. And then it says, because we are a rural borough, we get people who are living alone and isolation. I don't think Farnham Castle is a particularly good example of that. The other thing I wanted to bring up, and I don't know whether or not this is the right place to bring it up, but it occurred to me reading this, thinking about it, is we've got this wonderful chart on page 14 or page 118, where it shows the most deprived areas in Waverley in blue and in green. And in fact, what struck me the most on this is actually there aren't very many deprived areas in Waverley. A lot of it is yellow, which is not deprived, it's least deprived. Which made me go back to the first page where we talk about the groups that we're looking at. And I don't know what I think it's for this report, but it might be something that we might want to look at in the future. There's two groups that do appear to be missing from this list, which is on page 112 or page 8. The one group we don't seem to mention is any minorities, and I'm particularly thinking of women within minority society. Minority groups. Maybe we don't have that many, but we must have some. Do we know whether or not we can provide any help to those? And the other group, which we don't seem to be providing for, which is a bit in the news, is refugees. If we are really with so little deprivation in our area, what is our provision for refugees, and are we doing anything to help? Because we're seeing large numbers. That's all the 2 points I thought.
Thank you for that. I'm sure that they'll come to you. Yeah, I have to admit, I did look at the Farnham Castle bit and couldn't work that one out. I wasn't surprised to see Allfold, Cranny, Rural and Ellens Green, because if you look at that ward, it is something like the fourth most deprived in Surrey out of about 180 something wards. So Allfold is one of the fourth most deprived area. And that's from the government deprivation, which is a lot of things, you know, health, transport, mental health and everything else. So I was expecting Allfold, because it's nationally been recognised. I was a little bit surprised with Farnham Castle.
Chairman, the leader and the corporate policy manager want to say something.
Oh, I'll let them speak next. Oh, we have to keep them under control. Okay, who wants to go for a leader?
Thank you, Chair. And I certainly didn't mean to interrupt you speaking, Georgina. I'm always happy to wait and grateful to be included at all, Chair. So thank you. Just to completely understand where you're coming from about wards. I mean, my ward is also one of the most deprived in part, and part of the issue there is that it is also next to one of the richest Godalming Charterhouse. So it's juxtaposition sometimes of wealth and next to inequality that sometimes highlights these issues. I did just want to flag that. I think in terms of the general issues, though, we want to make sure that we can try and hit these areas as evenly as possible. And yes, our deprivation is going to be relative in some places, but there is core bits of niche areas of deprivation very much in Waverley. I'm not going to go into the depths about provision for refugees, but I refer Councillor Dixon and others to some of the press releases that we've issued in the last few days, and the page we've just released on the Afghanistan refugees in particular. But Councillor Dixon, I will send a note to all councillors updating what we're doing in general about refugees so that everybody's clear what we're doing. But thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Leader. Louise, are you poised to come in?
Sorry, Chair, thank you. Just a clarification over the Castle ward. I just thought it might be helpful for members to understand that it's actually a very big ward, and Castle Street is very much a small part of the eastern end of it, and it goes right across to the county border and includes the Chantries, I think, and it has got quite a rural western edge to it. So just a bit of clarity, really, that it is quite a mixed ward, and you shouldn't think it's just Castle Street, which obviously is quite an affluent area. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Forżewski.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. I'll try and be brief. I find this fascinating, and I would say the job that the officers have to do on this, it's so difficult, and I think for a number of variables, and I can see why you've put some of the things in there that you've put in there, because I think it's a necessity. I mean, I go back to the days when we were issuing grants to a whole sector of voluntary organisations, and we did need some management over those, because things are changing. There had to be proper strict criterias, and SLAs were definitely a way forward, because it did give organisations confidence. I know if I say the word, I'm going to stray into exempt, so I'm not. But where I am surprised to see the word ring fence, which I don't like, because I think it does show a bias towards one group. We talked about one organisation in our talks months ago, and it was said, no, we should not be specifically looking at that one organisation and ring fencing for them, because they should be in the pot like everybody else, fair and square. I take on board what was said about the youth provision, and youth provision, of course, is critically important, and you're right, it hasn't been highlighted in the past, and I think we've spoken about this at length, but youth provision can't be at the expense of, and Councillor Dixon's quite right as well, some of the deprivation and problems women are suffering from, and the refugees that are going to be coming into the country now, that we need to be thinking about what we can do. So I think this is a changing tide all of the time. And I think if we look at it from and I look at this, the health and well-being and the social welfare of what's looking at what, we can't get carers for our elderly people anymore, that the situation is absolutely dire. It really, really is. But we have to be aware that we are responsible to the taxpayer and the residents. We have to use their money wisely and sensibly. Ring fencing is not always an option, but to be fair across the board. But I also think whilst we face the most challenging and difficult times, not just because there's some of the things that's been said, and it's a very difficult place to have deprivation. Deprivation doesn't happen in Surrey. School-free meals doesn't happen in Surrey. There's no such thing as domestic abuse in Surrey. It's not talked about. So it's a much bigger issue that's out there that's actually not talked about and not recorded. But what I would just say from, to actually back up what you're saying, as I fully understand, as post-COVID starts to get implemented and we start to see the fallout, and we start to see the furlough schemes, not being paid for anymore, and we see the fallout of that from job losses and all the rest of it, we're going to see a lot more people in demand, and there's going to be then financial strains on our budget that might not be able to be as generous as we could be, because we have other things that we need to be looking out for. So I think we need that year-on-year accountability to see where our own finances are, because I think the prediction and the forecasts are there for us right here and right now, and we should be working towards those. So whilst I appreciate what the portfolio holder was saying, I'm afraid I don't quite agree, but I do think it's fair and square across the board, not ring fence for one, but I do think it was a provision that's been undervalued for a long, long time. But I think right here, right now, we all face very difficult challenges and a very difficult time ahead. And as a financial organisation who has to fund some of these organisations, your job is very, very difficult. Chairman, thank you for allowing me to go on.
Brilliant. I'll come to Councillor House in just 2 seconds. think one of the difficulties is some really, really good points being raised all over. Mark's got to try and capture them, because the first recommendation was for our comments. What I would like, Mark, if you could summarise them after the meeting and send them out to us. Excuse me. So we are happy that our comments and our concerns have been summarised to go to the executive, you know, about the women, the refugees, the ring fencing.
And minorities.
Minorities, there's quite a few.
Sorry. When you look at the definitions of these groups, it feels very sorry. And I would like to see a paragraph that says, we also encourage groups from minorities and from, other, diverse groups, and inclusivity is, we're not even seeing a mention of that. And if you even look at the photographs, folks, we've got lovely Surrey people. That's what Surrey people look like in our photographs. So we're being a little bit not as inclusive possibly as we could be in this document. Thank you.
Okay, so if Mark can try and summarise our views, because that's the recommendation one, and send that out just so we've got an accurate account of our views. People would have heard them anyway. There's been some really, really good views put across, and I think that's our role to say, hang on, we don't quite agree with that. How about we do this, cover those points and circulate that on email to get that sort of agreement that we've captured it correctly. So before we sort of finish on that item, Councillor Welsh, is there anything you want to summarise or raise that we haven't so far?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'll try and be quick. Moving on, because my first comments were just about the first bit. This is the Thriving Communities Commissioning Fund part. I don't see any mention of community meals, and I just don't want to lose that. I don't mean that that's going to be going through that system, but it's just not mentioned in here, and I just feel it's not in any danger, is it? It's not, no.
Okay, so we'll say, and Mark will capture that there's a concern that the community wheels has not been mentioned.
And just a couple of other things. I find it a little bit woolly in a couple of places. Make sure services are designed and shaped to meet the needs of people. Well, yes, of course, but how are you going to do that? An awful lot of work for officers. Assessing needs, planning services, procuring services, monitoring quality, that's what commissioning is. I mean, you're creating a huge task for yourself. That's just my comment. And if you manage to do it, I'll really take my hat off to you. A huge job here. Delivering improvements to services across the borough, focusing on health inequalities where the need is greatest. How are you going to do that? You don't say that in this report. I think that's probably all. I just do find it a little bit difficult, and I'd like to see a little bit more. You've got a piece on mental health in Waverley. I'd have liked to have seen a little bit more recognition of the early stages of dementia. That is going to be our largest problem, not the later stages, because I think something has to be done about that because people can't support themselves. But the early stages of dementia are where people get themselves really into trouble. And it's not been recognised. And I think that's something that we ought to be working with or towards helping. I think that's probably all, but thank you for letting me come back, Chairman.
Okay, you've mentioned a huge amount of work.
Big piece of work there.
Good, huge amount of work. But as you now are our nominated person, I think you forgot to raise the huge amount of work it's going to, be for you as well. But I know you'll take that challenge up and question and scrutinise and raise, the things like Meals on Wheels, which are really important. I think it would be impossible, to put too much more detail in a report like this without it becoming a 50-page report that is difficult to dissect. I think it's highlighted some issues. It's highlighted what our role is, what your role will be, and it will be to challenge, to scrutinise, question, disagree or support. That is what scrutiny is all about. So I feel quite guilty that you've got two bits of work which are going to be huge, but I know it's the two passions that you have, and I can't think of anybody better to be in that room talking about and asking those very, very same questions. I think some of this will come back. There'll be lots of information that we don't need to look at, but there will be issues, I think, for Katie and Kelvin that you challenge, that you're going to have to bring back to this committee, the very questions that we've raised, to say this isn't being looked at and this is a gap that is letting the residents down. So as I accept everyone's views, but I understand that we can't resolve them tonight. This is a first stage. I think it's been some great work. I think the work you're doing is brilliant. And, you know, I'm very, very supportive and grateful for that. Mark will wait for that summary, so our comments are accurate and we can support. So under number one really is subject to a summary from you that's supported. So that recommendation just needs that extra few words in there under brackets. I think the one thing about this overview and scrutiny, all of our main issues are long term. You know, we don't get too many quick fixes. You know, we're talking about leisure centres, we're talking about strategies dealing with aging well, strategies for suicide prevention, strategies for supporting people. So I make no bones about that we're not taking easy options here. We're taking the difficult ones and questioning them. So I think this is a work in progress. So we look forward to it coming back. I look forward to your challenges, which I know you will do, Jenny, but that's what you're here for. It's no good us saying, oh, this is marvellous, let's just move on. Yeah, we'll be letting down not only the residents, but your fellow colleagues as well. So I think probably as I got about 2 minutes on my clock, we've had some really good debates. Mark, are you happy on what we're expecting? What sort of time scale to get that, do you reckon?
I'm on leave tomorrow, but I think I should have time to do that on Friday.
So we'll give you a little bit of time. So should we say sort of beginning of next week? Yeah, we're quite generous in this committee. So maybe say Tuesday. That gives you plenty of time and gives you a bit of time to do some email exchanges. And once we agree that email exchange, then we take it as signed off by this committee. Okay, great debate. Thank you, everybody. Now that's to the end of my. Kate, are you happy with the way everything's been laid out?
Yeah, I think it's just make sure we get all those comments from Mark and we'll kind of look through them. Just want to start on the community meals. They are standalone. They are self-sufficient. They don't. We don't fund them at the moment, but with any service that applies, we always look at it. No, we haven't funded them for part of the transition when we move them over is actually they do help support with a small income to the centres. Yeah, the whole point was they became standalone, not requiring grant funding. No.
But clearly, Katie, they may be self-sufficient at the moment, but we're saying the frontier is not closed, and actually they may need to come to us. So there's no boundaries. Councillor, just to sum up before we finish.
Thank you, Chairman. Really quick though, the kitchens that they cook in are quite important to them. So whilst they might be standalone, they do need to operate in kitchens which are in buildings which we may or may not be supporting. So, I mean, there's a definite connection there. And I think community meals is such an important facility in our borough that we really can't do without, that we've got to, there is a connection, even though we don't fund them. If the kitchen disappears in the centres that we may or may not support, then they can't cook the meals.
And that's why it's always an open process. One year someone may not need us and the following year they may do. So I think as your point's well made, it is an open process that anybody can bid, and it will be down to the process to decide what happens. I think it's been an excellent debate. We did say it's about quality and getting people who care about the subject matters to introduce. So unless there's anything else, thank you everybody for your attendance. Thank you for the excellent contributions from my colleagues. And I'll even say that to the leader, who I allow probably on more than one occasion to come in, and the officers who, you know, have done some brilliant work. Thank you for your contribution. I look forward to the November meeting. We're going to have to be very careful what we put on the agenda. I think we're going to have to be very, very focused to give it the time it needs. So safe journey home, everyone. Finished 1 minute past, so my apologies for, according to my clock, 1 minute late. 2 naps, just